several favorites that are out there. And so one of the big clues, of course, is the Pillars of Heracles, which the island was just inside or outside. It could have been the Strait of Gibraltar, but as we said earlier, they seem to have kept moving. And there's at least 12, 13 places that have been put forward as possible sites for the pillars. One is the Strait of Messina, which is between Italy and Sicily, which would mean that the Atlantic Ocean in Plato's story was actually the Western Mediterranean.
That wouldn't be so weird, though, would it?
No, it's not impossible.
Yeah.
No. Another candidate, the Strait of Otranto. I'm not pronouncing that correctly, I'm sure. But that's the gap between the heel of the Italian boot and the country of Albania. And that would mean that the Atlantic was actually the Adriatic Sea.
Which, again, it wouldn't be so weird.
Yeah. Or some people have said maybe the Bosporus, which means that the Atlantic was actually the Black Sea.
Well, and I know that some of you go, well, that doesn't sound anything like the Atlantic. Well, that's because the names have changed over the millennia.
Yeah, and say the Black Sea, for example. Well, that's just a big lake, right? Well, when you're standing on the edge of it looking, it looks pretty ocean-like. You can't see the other side at all.
And at one time, wasn't it at one time connected to the rest of the ocean?
What, the Black Sea?
Yeah. Is that the one I'm thinking of?
It's connected now. At one time, it was not connected.
That's what okay.
Yeah, it was, and it used to have a much different shoreline. Yeah, and then suddenly that one day the old land bridge breaks and boom, they filled up with water real quick. So they found ruins. They found an ancient coastline down there and ruins on it and everything. Yeah. Too bad for those guys.
Yeah.
No warning. I mean, at least when you live on a volcano, you kind of get a warning that it's going to blow.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Except for the people of Pompeii, but they just didn't pay attention apparently.
Apparently not. Yeah.
Or maybe just didn't get any warning.
Yeah,
or maybe they got a warning and they just it kind of sucks to pack and move, so we'll just hope it's just going to rumble a little bit. And then just go to
It's been doing this for 20 years. It's fine.
Yeah, and then one day it kablooey. So we need to pick some places out. Actually, Mark Adams picked out 4 places.
Out of the hundreds.
Yeah, picked out 4 possible places. I think he picked them out because they were just places he wanted to travel to.
Yeah.
He never said that.
Yeah.
It's a good guess.
Yeah. We asked Mark Adams why he picked the 4 spots that he did out of the book.
Well, first of all, a lot of times you'll see locations for Atlantis that don't make any sense.
Oh, yeah.
If you look at the original details, assuming that Plato's story is real. Let's start with that assumption, which is, rocky to be certain. I mean, to assume the Atlantis story is real, first of all, you have to believe that a sea god named Poseidon created the island of Atlantis. So you're making some pretty big leaps here to start with. But let's assume that it's real. It's a story about a sea battle between Atlantis and Athens. So, for an ancient navy to be able to travel to attack Athens, it doesn't really make sense that it's outside of a certain area. It's not going to be crossing the Atlantic Ocean, so it's not the Bahamas. It's not coming from, Indonesia, as some people have said. There's a guy out there with a theory that Atlantis was in the Bolivian Altiplano.
Yeah, I know. 2 miles up, right?
Right, it's 2 miles up, hundreds of miles from the ocean.
I've been to the Altiplano, and I got to tell you this: it's not underwater.
It is about the least underwater place you can imagine.
Oh yeah.
So I drew a sort of a circle around Athens of a certain distance, and then Plato gives clues in the story. He says, it was opposite the Pillars of Heracles, or Hercules as it's usually called. It was near the land called Gades. It was an island. It was near the Panpelagos, or the Infinite Sea. So, once you start listing these things, you get the sense it had to be in the Mediterranean, a certain distance from Athens. And the 4 places that made sense to me after a week of deliberations with Mr. Tony O'Connell over in Ireland, were probably the most famous Atlantis site, the one that shows up on TV specials all the time, which is Santorini, an island of Greece. The island of Malta in the center of the Mediterranean. There is a site just outside the Strait of Gibraltar in southern Spain. And then there's a spot in Morocco near the city that's now called Agadir, also just outside the Strait of Gibraltar, but to the south. And those were the 4 sites that I went and explored at length.
So that's how Mark did it. And one of the places he talked about in his book is, and this is the number one favorite theory everybody seems to have, doesn't necessarily mean it's scientifically all that likely, but this is called the Minoan hypothesis. And this theory says that Atlantis was on the present-day island of Santorini, or more likely on the island of Crete, which is 73 miles south of Santorini, with an outpost on Santorini, the island itself. The ruins of a Minoan city named Akrotiri have been found on the south side of the island of Santorini, and so that lends a little credence to it. And they're pretty impressive ruins. I don't know, they're actually, if you go online, you can see pictures of them.
I didn't actually ever go look at the ruins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's some pretty cool pictures of the ruins out there, and they're really impressive ruins. 2- or 3-story buildings, and they had cobbled streets and drainage systems like sewage systems and stuff. So a really sophisticated city.
Cool.
Yeah. Too bad they built their city on the side of a volcanic island. But, oopsie. The island.
Location.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. So was Santorini Atlantis? People like it because it's a circular island, and it's circular because the middle of it blew out. It was a volcano, and it just exploded, Mount St. Helens style. It didn't just spew a little smoke and a little lava. No, it just went kablooey.
Blew the majority of it away.
Yeah. So and then there's a piece of it left. There's like a big crescent, and then an island out from that crescent, and then there's a cone in the middle that's rebuilding itself. That's the island.
As volcanoes do.
Yeah, as volcanoes do. And so that circular thing with the ring of water and another island in the middle is one of the things that really make people like Santorini as a candidate for Atlantis.
That means he would have embellished the number of rings, though, most likely.
Yeah, and also changed the size of them.
And made them like a lot.
Because the cone is much smaller, but in the original story, the center part is the largest part.
Listen, he was huge on Pythagoras.
Yeah.
And all of that geometry. So, I mean, it makes sense that he would have gone kind of wild on that part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And he liked threes and stuff like that, and so 3 rings and all that. But as to when this happened, the volcano was called Thera back in those days, and there are various estimates about when it went off. Some say 1627 BC, some put it at 1500 BC, and luckily 1500 BC was about 900 years before Solon visited Egypt. So, of course, that doesn't mean that Santorini actually is Atlantis.
Yeah, and it is convenient. I mean, I think that seems like one of those things where they say, oh, 900, well, the story that Solon was told was 9,000. It's possible they just added a 0 on accident. That fits conveniently with our estimations.
Yeah.
That feels really convenient to me.
You think so?
Yeah, a little.
Yeah. There's a lot of convenient stuff in this story.
I was going to say, we're going to be making that statement a lot.
Probably.
Oh, yeah. I'm thinking that, imagine if Thera had exploded millions of years ago, and then the central cone rebuilt itself, like it's happening in Mount St. Helens and even in Santorini today. Rebuilt itself to a fairly sizable island. Well, it's still got a ring of water around it and another ring of land, and then it goes dormant. And time goes by, people show up, start building cities. So I mean, there could have been all kinds of stuff going on this island, and then exploded again, and and that begat Atlantis. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, but the cone would have never, it would have always been a mountain, right? I mean, that's how cones rebuild themselves, is as cones.
Yeah.
Right? So that's a problem for me. I suspect the slopes would have been fairly steep, and that
But
it
the views
seems
would
like
have been awesome.
the views would have been awesome. But it does seem like that would be one of the things they would mention. It wouldn't be like, well, there was just this thing in the middle. They would say there was a mountain in the middle, and then there were rings around it.
So let's remember, though, we need to go back to who gave us the story. The story came from one source who delivered it in a very specific way. Now,
which source? The Egyptians? Because the Egyptians had a thing for pyramids. So they would have been like, and there was an awesome pyramid in the middle.
I'm not talking about the Egyptians at all.
You mean Plato.
I mean Plato. So he could have massaged it as much as he wanted.
Although his thing with Pythagoras, you would think that he would be like really excited if there was a triangle there.
Well, I still think he massaged it to be circles.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. But something I didn't mention about Akrotiri. The city was actually not destroyed by the volcano, but it was all covered with ash, which has actually preserved it pretty well, which is cool. Mm-hmm. And they've only excavated a very small percentage of it. There's lots more ruins to be dug up. So let's hope the Greeks can get their economy back in shape so they have some money for digging.
Yeah.
That'd be nice. But what's interesting is what hasn't been found in the city so far, which is dead bodies. Yeah, it's possible that the island was evacuated before Theora blew up. If it's true, if this was a Minoan outpost, and it is believed that Akrotiri was a Minoan city, then where would they have gone? They probably would have gone to Crete, which is where the Minoan civilization was.
They would have gone trying to go home.
Yeah, and so that's kind of unfortunate. So you go home and you're just sort of relaxing, saying, "I'm sure glad I got away from that volcano." And then the volcano goes off. Well, guess what? You get a major tsunami. And there you are on Crete, and well, Crete gets smeared by the tsunami.
Yeah.
And by the way, that tsunami would have also hit Athens.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like maybe that would be a reason for them to be attacking other cities, right? You know, you go back to Crete and they say, "No, we're full." We're full here. You guys got to go somewhere else, and your home.
No vacancy.
Right? Yeah, and your home, meanwhile, is experiencing these rumblings that you recognize as a precursor to something disastrous. So you think, all right, well, we got to go find the next closest place, and where's the next closest place? Well, maybe Athens.
Yeah.
So you go there, and they beat you off, and then suddenly, your situation is dire, and it just all gets washed away.
Oh.
I mean, I'm not opposed to that approach to it. If it is, I still think that if Atlantis was real, this is my highest candidate.
I would agree with that.
It's got good points. Yeah, I mean, of course, as for this aggressive sea peoples, it's believed the Minoans were actually pretty peaceful.
Desperate times, desperate measures.
Well, there's that, and also, it's like I'm not convinced, because if they were pretty peaceful, then that would make them kind of, historically speaking, really huge outliers.
Yeah.
Don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and so I really don't believe that they were.
Well, and there's also something to be said for, victors telling the story.
Yeah, there's that.
They say we were attacked when it's
totally
these people coming and showing up and saying, "Help us, please," and you attack them, and then you get to write history, and you get to say, "Oh no, we were attacked. We had to kill them all."
Yeah, we had to slaughter them mercilessly.
That never happened at all in history.
What,
Yeah,
rewriting history?
Yeah, not at all.
You're right.
Actually, you are kind of right. It's not written down anywhere, is it?
You're right.
Yeah, one of the reasons that it's believed that they were peaceful is that they don't find a lot in terms of defensive construction on the island. So
that's silly.
I think
that's a silly reason to think someone's peaceful. That just means they're more aggressive, doesn't it? It means they're attacking everyone around them before people around them are attacking them.
Well, yeah, exactly. They believe the best defense is good offense.
Yeah.
That's entirely possible.
Also, you're on an island, man.
Yeah.
Like, it's pretty easy to see people coming. If you're good at seafaring warfare, there's no reason to build defenses around your island.
Yeah, good point.
You release the Kraken and it's all done.
It's all done. You just pray to Poseidon a little bit, and he's like, "Oh God, my descendants, they're so needy. All right, fine. The wave, we'll send the wave again."
Yeah, I want my own Kraken.
Yeah.
The only problem with Crete and Santorini is, even put together, they're really kind of too small to accommodate that big plain that we were talking about. That's 230 by 340 miles. Crete is only 155 miles long. Of course, maybe if there were earthquakes, maybe parts of it subsided.
Yeah, maybe there are small states or stades. Maybe they're small stades.
Yeah, maybe actually by stades you meant something else entirely. And not 600 feet.
Yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, remind me, I got to show you some Google aerials of Crete. There's some interesting structures in the water, but just south of it. Yeah, and that's probably an artifact of Google's process rather than actual reality.
Yeah, well,
but
it's still interesting.
Take a look at it. It's kind of a head scratcher.
So this is a little off the topic, but I was messing around in Google Earth the other day looking for stuff that happened to be in the ocean. And have either of you used Google Earth recently?
Not recently.
Oh, maybe this has always happened and I never noticed it, but do you know that the oceans move?
They do?
No.
Yeah, if you look at the satellite images, it looks like there's rolling waves going across the water.
Really?
If you stop somewhere, it'll go for about 5 or 10 seconds and then it'll subside. I have no idea how Google does that. It's the cool. I was sitting here going,
that's kind of cool.
What is wrong? Holy crap! The waves are moving like it's a live picture.
Wow.
It's the coolest thing ever.
Maybe they have gone live.
Maybe Google's finally launched enough satellites.
No, I'm pretty sure they don't, because I was looking at some things that had obviously images from different times of day laid over each other.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty good theory.
Yeah, I know. Except, it is pretty. It's obviously a favor for a reason, and so maybe parts of Crete have crumbled away or something. I don't know. The ones that Mark picked. I picked another one that he didn't pick for our.
So we're not just copying his book.
Exactly. And, so he also went to Malta, and this is also a very popular one, and I can see why, because Malta has the oldest known ruins in the world, some of which do appear to be underwater, and because there has been a lot of seawater rise in the past 20,000 years.
What?
Yeah, true.
That sounds wrong.
Yeah, no.
I don't think that's happening.
Yeah, no. It's true.
The Earth is flat. We're safe.
Yeah, we're good.
The water just runs right off the edge.
Yep.
Yeah.
Onto the turtle.
Actually, one of these days, somebody will go down and pull that plug, and the water will go down again. Yeah. So Malta is in reasonable proximity, kind of south of the Strait of Messina, which we mentioned was a candidate for the Pillars of Heracles. It's been theorized that Malta used to be a lot larger, but that rising sea levels caused a lot of it to be submerged. And also in 2013, the scientists at the University of Malta did report that 20,000 years ago, Malta was a lot bigger and it was joined to Sicily via a land bridge. But of course, every island 20,000 years ago was a lot bigger because 20,000 years ago, the glaciers just started to melt.
Yeah.
And so sea levels shot up big time.
Right, because all that water was locked up as ice.
Yeah. I don't know if you guys have seen charts of it, but starting a little while back, I guess it was more like 15,000 years ago. It really shot up.
Well, we talked about this with the Bering Land Bridge. I mean, it was the same thing.
Yeah, and so they leveled off. And I don't mean totally leveled off, but they sort of leveled off about 7,000 years ago. Sea level rise. They've steadily been rising since then. But,
more and more recently.
Oh, yeah. But they've been rising since then, but really a lot less sharply than they did in the past. So Malta probably was bigger than it used to be. There's another thing that makes it appear that it used to be bigger, and maybe the islands were even joined, because it's actually 3 islands. It's Malta, Gozo, and a very small one in between called Comino, which has, I think, like 4 residents or something. Yeah, there are cart ruts, or what they call cart ruts, all over Malta and Gozo, which are these grooves that are sort of like worn into the limestone of the island, in the places where the limestone is exposed, and they're always in parallel. They look like cart tracks, like a
sledge,
a sled or a wheeled cart or something like that. But they've been worn in. They're all over, crisscrossing the islands. And what's weird about them is that in places they go right off cliffs. Other places they go down into the water, and so that kind of makes you wonder. I mean, if they're going down into the water, they're going to a destination.
Mm-hmm.
That destination must have been dry land at some point.
Well, or it's walking mermaids.
That's a good point.
It's top half fish, bottom half humans.
Mm-hmm. All right, that reminds me.
That's ugly. That's not pretty to imagine.
There's nothing to say that's not how mermaids are. I'm just saying.
Yeah, they drive cars just like the rest of us.
It's possible.
Yeah. But it does suggest to me that the islands used to be bigger, possibly even interconnected.
The interesting thing is that we know that limestone is one of the softer rocks, so it wouldn't take too awful long for tracks to start to show up if people are, if you've got a route, you take the same route every day, and you take that route every day for 100 years. It's not as if when you walk across some really hard stones and you never make a dent in them. So that's the one interesting thing about this island, is it just happens to have the right stone.
Yeah, and it has been inhabited by human beings for a long, long time.
Yeah.
Lots of those islands have down there.
Another reason to think that Malta might be the best candidate. There's a guy in Malta named Anton Massoud, who Mark mentions in his book. He interviewed him, spent a little time with him. And Massoud has gone back to primary sources for his Atlantis research. and read all these ancient documents in Greek and stuff like that. And he found an interesting quote from a Greek named Eumenos of Cyrene, who wrote, I'm not sure, I'm not pronouncing this, but I'm going to go Ogyges.
Sure.
Yeah, he wrote, quote, Ogyges was the king of Atlantis, the island that once existed between Libya and Sicily, and was submerged. This large island was known as Nicopolis Atlantica by our forefathers of Cyrene, as well as by the ancient Greeks, unquote. And I want to give Mark a hat tip here, because I lifted that quote straight out of his book. Thanks, Mark.
You didn't actually call this guy?
An interview? No, I didn't actually.
Okay.
Dang it.
Yeah, no, sorry, I can't afford it.
Well, let's be honest. If you had called him, you would have said, and I called him, and he hasn't called me back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what usually.
Yeah. Or, and I called him, but I don't speak Greek.
Yeah, yeah.
That's more accurate.
Yeah, except I think they speak Maltese on Malta.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, but of course the downside of the whole Malta theory is it's too small and it has no mountains. I suppose the same thing could be said for Santorini and Crete also. 15,000 years ago, sea levels were about 110 meters below what they are today. But if we take Plato's timeline seriously, and the story took place 9,000 years before Solon's meeting in Egypt, sea levels were about 60 to 65 meters lower than they are today. But so far, there's not evidence of a sophisticated human civilization that old.
Well,
But on the other hand, I mean, maybe it's all underwater. Maybe there's lots of evidence.
well, I think that, there's suggestions in other areas of the world that there were intelligent, like really sophisticated societies prior that we've just forgotten about. So,
or it's been submerged because
Yeah.
I mean, typically, the earliest cities were usually built on the edge of a body of water,
Yeah.
usually the ocean.
Well, there's also, now we're discovering there's a lot of red herrings in the ocean. Did you guys see that? I'll put this article up before or around the time that this comes out, but there was something that people were pretty sure was in an inhabited, submerged place that must have been above water at one time. And it had all these interesting structures, and it looked like it was almost a flagstone pattern on the ground. And it turned out the whole thing, they just finally figured out, was actually a natural formation just because of a certain kind of the gases that were coming out of the ocean floor, turning the stone into dolomite, which then allowed bacteria to do these things to it. Like, it's a total red herring, but it's one of those places where people are like, this has got to be something real. And there's probably a ton of those all over.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
You definitely, if you're looking for that stuff, you got your work cut out for you because
Yeah.
it's been down there and it's got stuff growing all over it, and that's covered with silt in a lot of places. So it's going to take a long time before we find anything useful down there.
Yeah, it's going to take a while, and then we're going to find that domed, bubbled city
Yeah,
where they're all
I know.
living
Yeah, and
still.
And it's the problem with it is too is like if it's above ground, you just send a bunch of college students out there with toothbrushes and spoons.
yeah, you can't do that so
You
much.
can't really do that so easily under the ocean. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
doesn't work.
No, it doesn't. So yeah, it's expensive. Let's move on to another theory. This is a somewhat popular one, the Canary Islands. So they are beyond the Pillars of Heracles, which qualifies them.
They're a little small, though.
They are kind of small, but they're also volcanic, so who knows? Maybe they've blown up numerous times in the past, and they're a lot smaller than they used to be.
I'm finding that my common thread for all of these are places that, like, anybody would want to go. So they're good suggestions because anybody who's researching them is like, you know what? I really got to go to the Canary Islands to figure out if it's Atlantis or not.
And I'll come back in 6 years with a tan.
Yeah.
And with some idea of if it's Atlantis or not.
Yeah. I would.
Yeah, me
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, when the Carthaginians discovered the Canary Islands, they found ancient ruins there, and of course the Carthaginians were themselves kind of ancient, so if they found ancient ruins, well,
Really ancient.
that's pretty ancient. There's also, remember that red, white, and black rock that I talked about?
Mm-hmm. The mottled colors, yeah.
Yeah, that rock can be found there. There are also natural hot and cold springs there. So yeah, that's one reason people kind of liking the Canaries. And then there's another theory out there that it wasn't just the Canaries, but also the Azores, Madeira, and Cape Verde Islands. All together are just fragments of the original Atlantis, which would be pretty large. I mean, it was called a continent and everything, but that's a lot of material.
Wait, say that part again?
A whole continent disappearing is kind of hard to swallow.
Well, the evidence proves it. I mean, the floor of the ocean is very thin. It's not like there's a thick crust like there is underneath the continents. And there's nowhere that is anywhere shown that it could have had a continent. Plus, there's no, what is it, where two tectonic plates collide? Yeah, there's nothing like that for it to have been submerged and then sucked under. There would be very obvious evidence if it was a little continent.
Yeah, no, I think so too. That's kind of the problem I have with this.
But if it was a God-made thing like we're doing in Saudi Arabia now, or not Saudi Arabia, I'm sorry, in the United Emirates, they're making these
those
island things.
Yeah.
I mean, if Poseidon was just making things like that, that could have submerged pretty easily.
One of the most famous Canary Island advocates was Heinrich Himmler. The famous Nazi.
Oh yeah. Familiar.
I did not see that coming.
Oh, I get it. But the Nazis were interested in Atlantis because they thought that perhaps the Atlanteans were the forebears of the German people.
Right, of course.
And the reasoning was that the Atlanteans were, advanced, superior, and awesome. So were the Germans, so there must be a connection there, right?
Yeah. The Nazis were really good at finding something that proved that they were amazing. And
they were great at manipulating the information to match what they wanted.
Yeah.
Man, they were so kooky sometimes.
Most of 99% of the time.
Yeah, kind of. So we talked to Mark about the Nazi connection, and here's what he had to say.
They had this whole team, the Ahnenerbe, I think it was called, put together by Himmler, and the whole point was it's very much like the first Indiana Jones movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark. They're looking for ancient evidence of this super Aryan race that, of course, eventually became the most super race of all, in their opinion, the National Socialists. And what's interesting is they had planned a big expedition to the Canary Islands, which is not, as far as possible sites go, it's not the worst one you could come up with, for the fall of 1939, and it seems that the reason they never got there is because the Nazis decided to attack Poland instead. So it's like, just one more bad thing to come out of that whole era. But yeah, I mean, the theories they were promoting were just completely nuts. I mean, going back tens of thousands of years and things like that. And, because stuff like that is interesting to a lot of people, it gives this tinge to Atlantis in general that makes it sound like, a subject that's only dealt with by crazy people. And I don't think that should be the case.
Enough about the Nazis.
Enough about them. And I should also mention there's a theory out there that's also called kind of racist. I don't know if it really is racist, but it's called diffusionism. And it's a theory that much, if not all, of the early advances in technology originated in Atlantis or in some place and then spread to the rest of the world. The reason it's controversial is it's sort of a put down of all these other people. It's like saying that these superhumans in Atlantis invented all this cool stuff and it went out to the whole rest of the world. And that's
which is filled with dummies who couldn't figure it out on their own.
You could never figure that stuff out, And so that I don't really agree with the whole diffusionism thing myself. Because some ideas are kind of obvious, and people could separately, coincidentally, have the same ideas. It's not at all beyond the realm of reason.
Like pyramids?
Yeah, I mean, so there's pyramids in the Americas, there's pyramids in Egypt, so what? It's not that remarkable a concept when you think about it.
Neither are brooms.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, hey, simple ideas. Another problem besides their small size, the Canaries are outside the Pillars of Heracles, but they're like almost 700 miles away.
From the Strait of Gibraltar.
Yeah, and that's a lot of material to go missing, so I don't know. Yeah.
Well, the remaining, you don't know how close the outer wall or the plain was.
What remains is the small pieces left is the piece that was
furthest part,
away.
Yeah,
and the rest of it's all been smooshed and it's gone. Yeah, okay.
That seems unlikely, though.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the way that everything works in that area.
No.
Yeah, no. Let's go to another theory here. Cadiz, Spain. And by the way, I was just out yesterday doing a little surfing on Street View in Cadiz. And I really recommend that you go out and you look at it. If you look at the aerial of it, there's a peninsula out in the front of the town, in front, by the Atlantic Ocean. And at the very, very north end of that, it's like the old town, the old city. I'd really recommend doing a little street viewing in there because it's really cool.
Is it just because it's cool architecture, or?
Just cool architecture and really narrow streets. I mean, some streets too narrow even for a car, and then most of them are like, just one car.
Like that in Italy a lot.
Yeah. It's just a really beautiful, cool sound.
I'll have to check it out.
I really want to. Yeah, that's a nice thing. If I can ever afford to go there, at least I can see it on Street View. I really would like to go there. It looks like a really cool place. Okay, anyway, Cadiz, Spain. Okay, aka Gadis, which is mentioned actually by Plato, Gadis. So, of course, there's other places that would possibly qualify as Gadis also. But it's thought that Atlantis maybe perhaps wasn't an island, because apparently the Greek word for island can also mean peninsula. So this theory has gained prominence in recent years because Cadiz is just outside the Pillars, and it's also in an area that's known for massive earthquakes and tsunamis.